A woman found a lost wallet outside a Boston coffee shop. She opened it, saw thick bills, and quietly slipped it into the mailbox without taking a cent. No cameras, no name left behind. But the next day, a man in a tailored suit showed up at the tiny bookstore where she worked, calling her by name. No one knew how he knew, or why he looked like he owed her something far greater than money. If you believe that dignity still matters, even when no one's watching, stay with us. And if this story stirs something in you, feel free to like, share, or leave a thought. Ava Thompson didn't expect much from Thursdays. They were usually quiet, slow-footed hours at Willow and Pine, the small bookstore nestled between a florist and a shuttered bakery on Charles Street. The kind of day that passed like fog. But that Thursday, the city seemed to hum with a strange restlessness. The sky was the color of old pewter. Boston in November carried a weight. She had learned to live with wet air, impatient people, the occasional kindness folded between long stretches of silence. She had just locked up, her fingers stiff from the cold, when she noticed something by the bench outside the Four Seasons across the street, a glint of leather. It didn't belong to anyone waiting for a cab or rushing under an umbrella. The sidewalk was nearly empty, the light from the hotel casting a faint glow over puddles and brick. She crossed slowly, coat pulled close, and picked it up. It was a wallet, thick, heavy. The kind that wasn't bought but gifted sleek black leather with stitching that whispered cost. Inside, hundreds in crisp bills, at least 6 cards, one of them metallic, no numbers embossed, just the faint reflection of her own face in its sheen. And there it was, a company badge, Blake Ventures, a corporate photo, Nathaniel Blake, CEO. She exhaled once, quietly, then looked up again. The street remained still. No footsteps running back in search. No distant voice yelling for something lost. Ava snapped the wallet shut and turned toward the nearest T-station. On the way down the steps, she passed a payphone mounted on the wall, one of the few still surviving. A small sign said, "Local calls only. No change required for emergencies." She dialed the company number printed on the back of the ID. "Blake Ventures. This is reception," came the voice, smooth, professional. "I found a wallet," Ava said. "It belongs to someone named Nathaniel Blake. Leave it at the front desk. Tower location, financial district. You can drop it off tomorrow between 9 and 11. Security will handle it." That was all. No follow-up. No thank you. The next morning, Ava dressed in a faded blue sweater and the same coat she wore every winter. Her boots were scuffed at the toes. She looked out of place when she stepped through the glass doors of Blake Ventures Tower. Everything inside was polished white marble floors, chrome elevators, people moving like they already belonged. The front desk staff didn't ask questions. They didn't offer her a seat. After waiting nearly 15 minutes in the corner of the lobby, a young man in a tailored suit walked toward her with an envelope. "From Human Resources," he said, handing it over without meeting her eyes. A courtesy gesture. You didn't have to return it. So, this is a token of appreciation. Ava held the envelope. It was thick. "I didn't do it for that," she said. "Still, it's from the company." She nodded slightly. No point arguing. She turned to leave. Outside, the wind had picked up. Light rain tapped against her shoulders as she stepped into the open. She paused by a public trash bin, glanced down at the envelope, and then, without ceremony, dropped it in. She didn't know who had decided that kindness needed to be paid off, but it felt wrong in her hands. Upstairs on the 28th floor, Nathaniel Blake stood in his office, hands resting on the edge of his desk. The security feed was still playing on his monitor. He'd watched her enter, watched her wait, watched her turn away without a word. He didn't know her name, but he couldn't look away when she stepped into the rain and walked towards the edge of the plaza. The camera caught the moment her hand hovered over the trash bin. A pause, then the white envelope disappeared into its mouth. She didn't hesitate. That's what struck him most. No moment of temptation, no glance around, no second thought. She had refused what most people would have accepted without guilt. Nathaniel leaned closer to the screen, watching her figure recede down the sidewalk. She wasn't dressed like someone who could afford to throw money away, yet she had done exactly that. His assistant buzzed through the intercom. Board meeting in 5 minutes. He didn't answer. The rain smeared down the windows like breath held too long. For some reason, he stayed there, eyes fixed on the small figure disappearing beneath the edge of his frame. She didn't look back, but he knew. Something had shifted. And whatever it wasn't going to let him go easily. Nathaniel Blake wasn't in the habit of watching security footage. Most mornings, his time was split between calls with London, walking through the product floor, and fielding updates from every department that somehow still needed his approval. But this morning, he'd come in early, bypassed his usual espresso, and gone straight to his office on the 28th floor of Blake Ventures Tower. The rain was still coming down outside, a steady gray drizzle that blurred the skyline beyond the glass. On his desk, the screen replayed the same loop, a woman in a worn coat entering the lobby, waiting near the wall without asking questions, then leaving with an envelope in hand and discarding it in a trash bin outside without breaking stride. He watched it again, and again. She didn't even hesitate. No glance at the envelope's contents. No moment of conflict. Her expression was unreadable, but her choice was firm. She had returned a wallet full of cash, refused a reward, and walked away as if none of it mattered. Nathaniel leaned back. On paper, she didn't exist. He'd asked for her name from security just out of curiosity. He told himself, but the file was blank. No ID checked, no notes, just time-stamped footage and a receptionist's vague mention of a bookstore on Charles Street, Ava Thompson. He found the name in an old email from the community outreach team. Blake Ventures had sponsored a literacy program 2 years ago in that neighborhood. A staffer had mentioned a woman named Ava who volunteered her weekends, who ran children's reading hours even after her shift ended. Nathaniel hadn't read that email then. He did now, across town. Ava was restocking a display of poetry collections at Willow and Pine. She moved a little slower than usual. Something about the morning unsettled her. She hadn't told anyone about the wallet except for Rachel, the shop's assistant manager and her closest friend. Rachel had rolled her eyes when she heard about the envelope. "They gave you money like you're a delivery girl," Rachel had said. "You should have taken it. Bought new shoes at least." "I didn't want it," Ava replied, then added, more quietly, "It felt wrong." That would have been the end of it, except her phone buzzed during lunch, a notification from her bank, a deposit labeled Blake Ventures, ex gratia. She stared at the screen, then tapped open her contacts and dialed the bookstore's tiny financial liaison, Mark, who also did part-time tech work for small businesses. "Can you block a transaction, reverse it?" He laughed. "That depends. Is it stolen? It wasn't earned." He paused. "Okay, now I'm interested." Back at the tower. Nathaniel hadn't made a decision yet. Not exactly, but his mind kept circling the same thought. People didn't do what she did. Not in his world. Not when there was money on the table. Her refusal, so quiet, so deliberate, had pulled something loose in him. He didn't know what, only that he couldn't let it go. By late afternoon, he'd changed out of his suit and put on a plain navy sweater. No driver, no assistant. He walked 5 blocks on foot, hands in pockets, cap pulled low against the rain. The bell above Willow and Pine's door jingled softly when he stepped in. The place smelled of paper and cinnamon. Books were stacked unevenly on every surface, and someone had written a quote on the chalkboard near the counter: "Integrity is doing the right thing, even when no one is watching." Ava was behind the register, sorting receipts. She didn't look up. Nathaniel stood still for a moment, unsure of what he'd expected. A flash of recognition. Thank you." He felt foolish. Then she glanced up, eyes meeting his for a fraction of a second. No flicker of memory. Just a polite, tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Let me know if you need help finding anything," she said, turning back to her papers. He nodded once, then took a slow lap through the aisles, unsure if he'd come to see her or just to see what kind of place raised someone who did what she did. He didn't buy anything, didn't speak again. But as he pushed open the door to leave, he looked back over his shoulder. Just for a second. She didn't. He walked out into the rain, wondering when the last time was that someone hadn't recognized his name. The bell over the door chimed softly just after noon. Ava Thompson didn't look up right away. She was kneeling in the back corner of Willow and Pine, fitting a new stack of Wendell Berry's essays into a narrow wooden shelf already too full. Her hands moved automatically. She liked this part of the job, the quiet, the touch of paper, the rhythm of something simple, done well. Footsteps approached, slow and measured. A man's voice followed. "Excuse me, do you carry any Wendell Berry poetry or just his prose?" Ava stood and dusted off her knees. She turned to find a man in his 30s, clean-shaven, soft brown hair tucked neatly behind his ears, dressed in a plain button-down and dark jeans. Nothing about him shouted wealth or power, but something about the way he held his hands behind his back made her think he didn't always ask for help. "Both," she said. "Over here." She led him 3 shelves down and pointed. "This one's the newer printing, but we have a used copy of Jayber Crow in the fiction section if you're open to a story instead of essays." "I've never read him," he said, "but someone I trust once quoted a line. It stuck." Ava raised an eyebrow. "Which line?" He paused. "We live the given life, not the planned." She nodded. "That one finds people when they need it." He smiled, not wide, but sincere. "Then maybe it's time I read the rest." As she turned to walk back toward the register, he followed with a second question. "If you had to choose one book to keep forever," he asked, "just one, what would it be?" She stopped mid-step. He didn't say it like a flirt, more like a dare, or a test. She thought for a moment before answering. "Jayber Crow, actually, for how it makes silence feel like a full sentence." They stood in the center of the store, between sunlight stretching through the window and the hum of the small heater tucked behind the counter. He said nothing more, just held her gaze for a second longer than expected. Ava cleared her throat. "We have a copy in the back that's been handled, but it's honest. I'll get it." When she returned, she handed it to him without a receipt, just a small post-it note inside the front cover with a handwritten line, "Come back if it doesn't sit right." He looked down at the note, then back at her. "You're not selling me a book," he said. She shrugged. "I'm not in a rush to sell anything." He laughed softly, tucked the book under his arm, and turned toward the door. "Thanks for not treating this like a transaction. Try reading it on a rainy afternoon." She called after him. "It holds up better that way." At the door. He paused for just a second, then said, "I will." The bell jingled as he stepped out. Ava returned to the poetry shelf. Her hands moved, but her thoughts drifted. There was something odd about that encounter. Not strange, just weightier than usual. Customers came in and out every day, but most didn't ask questions like that. Most didn't leave with silence instead of a name. Rachel peeked around from the counter. "Cute guy," she whispered. "Did he leave a number?" Ava shook her head. "Didn't even give a name." "Well, maybe he's the poetic kind, or the runaway kind." Same energy. Ava smiled without answering. Then, without really meaning to, glanced toward the front window. The sidewalk was mostly empty now, but in the distance, the man turned back for a breath, his eyes meeting the glass. He didn't stop walking, just enough of a glance to make her wonder if he'd really been looking at her or just through the reflection. She didn't step closer, but she stood still, just a few seconds longer than usual. He disappeared down Charles Street, and the store grew quiet again, the kind of quiet that held something unsaid just beneath its surface. Nathaniel sat alone in his office long after the building had quieted. The hum of HVAC vents and the faint whir of distant printers were the only sounds left in the tower. His desk light was dimmed, the city's night glow seeping in through floor-to-ceiling glass. On the screen before him, the video replayed again, but not from the front lobby camera. This angle was different, shot from the northwest awning near the revolving doors. He hadn't noticed it before. The footage showed Ava stepping outside, envelope in hand. The rain was heavier that morning, misting the pavement in gray. She hesitated near the trash bin, not for long, just enough that the movement became deliberate. Her hand lowered, the envelope fell, and then, without wiping her face or checking her coat, she looked up. Nathaniel paused the footage. Her face, lit briefly by reflected light from the glass exterior, held something he couldn't name, not pride, not defiance, but something closer to clarity, like she'd made peace with what she'd done before she even walked into the building. He leaned closer. Her eyes weren't scanning. They were fixed toward the upper floors, toward him. He hit rewind, watched again. Then it came back to him, fast and sudden. 2 years ago, at a community book fair in Roxbury, Blake Ventures had helped fund a public reading space. It was a token gesture, truth be told part of a local initiative his father had approved before stepping down. Nathaniel had attended, unofficially, no press, no photos. He hadn't wanted to be seen, just to watch. He remembered standing in the back of a modest crowd as a young woman stepped to the mic and spoke not about numbers or literacy rates, but about how stories could carry people farther than money ever could. He remembered the tone of her voice, how she read a passage from their eyes were watching God and let silence hang before she closed the book. He'd never forgotten that. And now, watching this woman, this same woman, drop an envelope without a trace of bitterness, he felt something close to shame. Not because of what she did, but because he hadn't recognized her the moment she walked in. He scrubbed the footage backward again, then stopped. It was definitely her, Ava Thompson. The woman who had once told a room full of strangers that not being seen was a wound deeper than debt. And now, she was here again, in his world, but still invisible to the people who should have thanked her. He rubbed his temple. The thought that gnawed at him wasn't about her action. It was about his inaction. How easily he could have missed it. How easily he had missed it twice. There was no reason to bring it up. Not now. She hadn't recognized him that day at the bookstore. If she had, she would have said something. Or maybe she was pretending not to know. But that wasn't her style. Her silence wasn't the kind that hid things. It was the kind that protected them. He stood up and crossed the room, restless. The night outside was thick, blurred with rain. His reflection in the glass looked older somehow, like someone still deciding who he wanted to be, even after all these years. Nathaniel walked back to his desk, shut off the monitor, and closed the folder with her name in it. He wouldn't tell her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But he remembered her voice that day at the fair, the way people listened, the way he had. And it struck him again. And without ceremony, that the person who had once moved him with words didn't even remember him enough to expect anything now. She hadn't come back for gratitude. She hadn't wanted a reward. But she had looked up once, just before walking away. And now, for the first time in a long while, he didn't know what to do with that kind of grace. The next time he came in, it was raining again, but not heavily. A quiet drizzle blurred the windows of willow and pine, and the lights inside made the whole place feel like a lantern tucked into the corner of the street. Nathaniel walked in without hesitation, though there was still no sign above the door that told him to return. Ava was behind the counter, taping the corner of a cardboard box that had given up holding its shape. She looked up when the bell chimed, surprised, but didn't say so. He carried a book in his hand, a battered first edition of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. "I was hoping to find the reprint," he said, holding it up like a question. "I gave my copy to someone years ago, and I've missed it more than I expected." Ava tilted her head. "Not many people come in looking for it. That's a quiet kind of heartbreak." He smiled and followed her to the second-hand section. She found one on the middle shelf. Not new, but gently read. The kind of book that had been held, not stored. Tea, she offered, after he lingered too long by the poetry corner. He nodded. "Only if it's the kind that tastes like books." They sat in the back nook of the store, the one where two mismatched chairs faced a low table, a cracked ceramic teapot between them. The rain ticked softly against the window pane, and the city beyond seemed paused. Their conversation was slow and quiet, like pages being turned rather than chapters being told. They talked about stories they grew up with, the idea of returning to books as if they were people you once loved and left. Ava shared how she taught herself to read with picture books from the Salvation Army. Nathaniel listened more than he spoke, asking questions that didn't feel rehearsed. At one point, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, excused herself, and stepped into the stockroom. Nathaniel stayed seated, out of respect more than curiosity. But as she walked away, her bag tipped slightly on the bench beside her. A folder slid out. He didn't mean to look, but something about the words on the corner caught his eye. Boston Education Grant Program. He picked it up to set it back, but the top letter had unfolded. He saw enough. A rejection. Too many applicants. Limited funding. Family income bracket exceeded threshold. The kind of letter that sounds polite and bureaucratic, but carries the weight of a slammed door. He placed it exactly where it had been, folding it with the same crease she'd used. When Ava returned, her eyes were a little red, but her voice was steady. "Bad news?" he asked gently, though he already knew. "No," she said, then paused. "Not today. Anyway." He didn't push. She poured them both more tea. They sat in silence for a while after that, but not the kind that itched or asked to be broken. It was closer to the silence of knowing there are things you don't need to explain to someone who's already listening. Ava finally spoke again. "People talk about fairness like it's a system, but it's not. It's just the absence of someone deciding you're less than them." Nathaniel looked at her and realized that everything she did, from returning a wallet to serving tea, carried that same weight. She wasn't interested in being congratulated for doing the right thing. She just didn't know how to do the opposite. He thought of the offices upstairs in his tower, where fairness was often a line in a speech, not a lived truth. He thought of how quickly a life could veer off course with one letter, one decision, one person not seeing the cost of saying no. Ava stood to clear the cups. As she did, he stood too, his hand brushing against hers for a moment longer than politeness required. Their eyes met. Neither looked away immediately. She opened her mouth, as if to say something, but stopped. "I'm here a lot," he said, quietly. "If you ever want to talk books, or silence." Ava gave a small nod, then looked down, then looked back up. "Maybe next time, you'll bring a story you haven't finished yet." He stepped out into the fading rain, and for the first time in years, the book he carried wasn't the only thing he hoped to return for. The rain returned that morning like it never left. Thin and steady, it slicked the bricks outside Willow and Pine, ran along the edge of the awning like tired fingers, and tapped a quiet rhythm on the single-pane windows. Ava had just turned the store sign to open when she heard the familiar jingle of the doorbell and looked up to see him again. Nathaniel stepped inside without an umbrella, his sleeves rolled, a modest tool bag slung over his shoulder. He wore no coat, no watch, no hint of his usual polish. His hair was damp, clinging slightly to his forehead. He looked less like a customer and more like someone who knew what he'd come to do. "I hope this isn't strange," he said, walking in with quiet purpose. "I noticed last time. You've got watermarks up by the poetry wall. Might be a leak. Thought I could take a look." Ava blinked, unsure whether to be amused or suspicious. "You brought tools." He lifted the bag. "Basic stuff. I fix things. Sometimes." She paused, then nodded toward the back. "We've got an old ladder in the supply room. Don't fall." He offered the ghost of a smile. "I'll try." The ladder groaned when he climbed it. Ava stood beneath, arms crossed, pretending to organize a cart of returns. But she kept glancing up. Nathaniel worked quietly, carefully, examining the ceiling tile and gently pushing it aside. A faint stream of water had been collecting where the wood met the frame. He used a bit of sealant, a scrap of plastic tucked in his bag, and a quiet, practiced steadiness that didn't fit someone from a glass tower. "You've done this before," she said. He adjusted the seal. "Not recently. But yeah. My mom taught me. She didn't like waiting for someone else to fix what was in her house." There was a silence after that. Not heavy, not awkward, just real. When he came down, there was a smudge of dust across his cheek and a small tear at the knee of his jeans. He wiped his hands on an old towel Ava handed him. She didn't thank him, not with words, anyway. But she looked at him differently now, less like someone who didn't belong here, and more like someone who chose to be here, on purpose. "While I'm at it," he said, pointing to the corner above the register, "you've got a bulb out." She narrowed her eyes. "You planning to rewire the place, too?" He grinned. "Just one light. Promise." 10 minutes later, the bulb flickered to life. Warm, soft. Not perfect, but better than what had been there before. They both looked up at it, then at each other. For the first time, they laughed, not politely, not cautiously, but as if something between them had shifted into a new gear. The kind of laugh that doesn't need a reason, only the right moment. "I should charge you," he said. "That was labor." "I'll give you a book instead," she replied. "Something you won't want to return." He tilted his head. "That's a tall order." She walked behind the counter, pulled a copy of The Long Winter by Laura Ingalls Wilder, and handed it to him. Try living through New England Januaries without it. He accepted it like a gift, not a transaction. As he tucked the book under his arm, one of the store clerks, Jamie, leaned toward Ava with wide eyes once Nathaniel stepped toward the door. "Okay," Jamie whispered. "Be honest. He's not, like, secretly famous or something." "Right." Ava turned her head slightly. Why Jamie gestured toward the door? He just fixed the ceiling and smiled while doing it. That's not normal. Ava watched Nathaniel reach for the handle, his back to them, the rain still steady outside. "He's not famous," she said softly. "Just uncommon." Nathaniel looked back one last time, not for long, just enough to catch her watching. Then he stepped out, into the kind of rain that didn't rush you, but asked you to stay a moment longer. The bookstore had begun to change, subtly but steadily, not in the smell of old paper or the worn squeak of its wooden floorboards, but in the way strangers entered. Some asked for titles they'd never heard of. Others claimed they'd just stumbled in, though Ava suspected it had more to do with Nathaniel's quiet appearances than the poetry table near the window. People started calling him the guy who fixed the leak, or Ava's tea guest. Jamie, ever the observer, once whispered that he looked like someone who could afford a suit, but chose not to wear one, and that, somehow, was worse. On a gray Friday afternoon, as Ava restocked a row of new releases, Nathaniel arrived with something folded in his coat pocket. He waited until the store calmed before approaching the register. "Do you like art?" he asked, casually, like asking about the weather. Ava blinked. "I like it quiet, and with good lighting. There's a fundraiser this Saturday. Boston Center for the Arts, small event. Local artists, some pieces for auction." He hesitated. "I'd like you to come." She stared at him. He added quickly, "No tuxes, just curiosity and conversation." Ava paused, her fingers resting on the spine of a hard cover. "You realize I don't own anything close to cocktail attire." "You wore that blue cardigan once," he said, "the one with the mismatched button. That could start a whole gallery." She smirked in spite of herself. "You're not great at this." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm asking instead of assuming." When Saturday came, Ava stood in front of her mirror for too long. The dress she chose was simple, navy, with a belt that refused to sit straight. She hadn't worn it in 2 years. Her shoes were clean but scuffed at the toes. She brushed her hair twice, left it loose, and caught the bus downtown because she couldn't bring herself to accept the ride he offered. Boston Center for the Arts shimmered with warm light as she approached. Through tall windows, she saw tall men in suits, women in cream-colored silk, and servers balancing trays of wine with ease. Her stomach turned. She almost didn't go in. But then she saw him standing by the entrance, sleeves rolled at the wrist, no tie. When he saw her, his face lit up in a way that felt quieter than admiration, more like relief. "Still think this isn't your world?" he asked gently. I think I've wandered into a very expensive dream, she replied. It's just paintings, he said. Let's not give them more power than that. Inside. The space was wider than she expected, full of soft jazz and murmured small talk. She tried not to look down at her shoes. He kept close but never guided her, never placed his hand on her back like others did their guests. It was the silence between them that made her feel seen, not instructed. They stopped at a piece titled Inheritance, an oil painting of a table missing one leg, held up by a stack of books. Ava tilted her head. That's either brilliant or a little too on the nose, she said. Nathaniel leaned in. Depends on whose table it was. They laughed quiet, unsure, but real. Then it happened. A woman in her 60s approached, dressed in a navy dress coat and pearls. Her eyes flicked from Ava to Nathaniel with practiced efficiency. Nathaniel, she said warmly, I didn't expect to see you here tonight. Is your father attending? Ava's breath caught, but she said nothing. Nathaniel's face didn't flinch, but the smile slipped slightly. Hi, Ellen. No, he's not. I'm here as Nate. He turned to Ava quickly. This is Ava. She's a friend. Ellen gave a knowing nod, not unkind, just practiced. The kind of nod people in that world used to accept and dismiss in the same motion, before more could be said. Nathaniel touched Ava's elbow and gently steered her toward the adjoining exhibit hall. They moved past a sculpture of two hands, reaching for one another, frozen mid-air, toward a quieter corner of the room where no one was standing. He exhaled slowly. I didn't plan for that. Ava crossed her arms lightly, still watching the entryway. So, your name isn't just Nate? No, he admitted. Should I have known? He hesitated. I didn't want you to. A silence hung, filled only by the sound of footsteps across polished floors. Then he asked, voice quieter than usual, like he didn't want the room to hear it. If you knew who I really am, would you look at me differently? The morning was brisk, spring pushing back against the last breath of winter. Ava tightened her scarf as she stepped off the 39 bus in Jamaica Plain, a reusable tote hanging from her shoulder and a box of donated books in her hands. The old community center hadn't changed, still peeling paint around the windows. The same creaky front door, but it had always held something solid for her, memory, routine, things she could count on. She'd volunteered here for 2 summers in college, helping kids with their reading and organizing book drives. Today, she'd come back to drop off a few titles and maybe see if they still needed weekend help. The staff at the front desk recognized her instantly. Hugs were exchanged. Someone made tea, and one of the kids, 7-year-old Elijah, dragged her by the hand into the art room. This way. You gotta see the new painting we made, he shouted, sneakers squeaking down the hallway. She smiled and followed. The hallway smelled of finger paint and disinfectant. Children's voices rose and fell behind each door like shifting wind. When they reached the last room, she paused. Above the doorway, on a modest wooden plaque, were 6 carved words donated by the Blake Foundation. She blinked. The words didn't hit her all at once. It started as a nudge in her chest, then a slow, curling tightness in her stomach. She stepped inside. The walls were covered in drawings, scribbled hearts, superheroes, lopsided houses. And there, taped to the whiteboard, was a child's crayon picture of a man crouching next to a bicycle. A speech bubble said, I'll fix it, don't worry. Above his head, Nate. Ava stared. She didn't move when Elijah tugged her hand again. He came here last week. Fixed Miss Tanya's chair. Helped paint shelves, too. He's nice. He says grown-ups should listen more. You know him. She didn't answer. Her legs felt rooted. Breath short. Nate. Blake Foundation. Blake Ventures. She hadn't asked, and he hadn't offered, but the pieces were never hidden, just waiting for her to look. She walked back into the hallway, heart pounding against her ribs in a stuttering rhythm. The noise of children faded behind the door. The light seemed too sharp now, like everything had stepped closer without her permission. And then she saw him. Nathaniel stood just outside the iron gate of the center, coat unbuttoned, hands in his pockets, hair shifting in the wind. He wasn't trying to hide. No car, no entourage. Just him still, quiet, waiting. Their eyes met. She stopped walking. There was no gesture from him, no explanation. Just a silence that stretched like a wire pulled taut between them. He didn't move toward her, didn't raise his voice. He simply let her see him entirely, unmistakably, and unshielded. Ava's fingers clenched at her side, not in anger, not yet, but in something that trembled between disbelief and hurt. She turned. Her footsteps echoed across the sidewalk. He didn't call out. He didn't follow. And this time, it was her shadow that disappeared behind the closing door. The air in Dorchester felt heavier than Ava remembered. The same cracked sidewalk greeted her outside her mother's two-story home, the same rusted wind chimes clicking softly from the porch beam. But inside, everything had shifted. Not because the furniture had moved, it hadn't in over a decade, but because she had. She arrived with no explanation. Her mother, Judith, didn't ask for one. She simply opened the door, took the tote bag from Ava's shoulder, and said, "You look like you need soup." Later that night, the two sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The laminate top had a chip near the edge from when Ava was 13, the result of an angry math test and a slammed fist. Judith's hands wrapped around her mug like they always did when she spoke of the past, not to dramatize, just to steady herself. "I ever tell you how it really ended?" Judith asked, her voice low. Ava nodded. "The eviction." "Yeah, a dozen times." Her mother gave a quiet smile. "Not the end, the part before it, the part they didn't print." Ava looked up from her bowl. Judith leaned back. "After Blake Foundation bought the land, we thought it meant stability. They sent a nice man, Tomlinson, I think promised a learning center, a library, new lights, said the foundation wanted to give back. Then 6 months later, we get the notice, not from the foundation, but from the real estate group they sold it to. Just like that. We were out. Ava didn't speak. The soup had gone cold. I tried to fight it. Your dad wrote letters to every council member. But who listens when the paper trail's clean? Legal. They said, just business." Judith's voice tightened. "They didn't even spell our name right on the court papers." There was a silence that filled the room like fog. Ava rose without a word and went into the spare room. The air smelled of old cedar and lavender. On the dresser sat a photo of her father, a younger version of her own eyes, steadier, softer. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared. She wanted to scream. At Nathaniel. At herself. At the awful, slick machinery behind every polished press release. Instead, she pulled out a notepad and wrote. She told him everything. The night sleeping in a borrowed church pew. The day her father collapsed on the courthouse steps. The fact that she had forgiven, not because it was easy, but because she had to keep breathing. And how she never imagined that the boy smiling at her from behind a paperback would be wearing the name that broke her mother's spine. But she didn't send it. She folded the letter and slid it beneath the frame of her father's photo. Then, she lay back and watched the ceiling like it might answer something. Days passed. When Ava returned to the bookshop, she wore the coat she hadn't touched in a week. She walked slower, not out of uncertainty, but out of restraint. As she approached, she saw him. Nathaniel stood near the doorway. No pretense, no smile. Just a man holding something unsaid between his fingers. Ava didn't break stride. She stepped past him. He opened his mouth to speak, but she didn't let him. She stopped, turned slightly, and said, "You're the son of the man who destroyed my family." Then she walked inside, and this time, it was his silence that filled the street. The days that followed were quiet in all the wrong ways. Ava went back to shelving books, sweeping the narrow aisles, checking stock orders like muscle memory, but nothing felt settled. Customers would ask where Nate was, with a smile that presumed familiarity. Ava would answer with a clipped, "Not today," and move on. Nathaniel didn't come back. not to the store, but he showed up in other ways. It started with an email Ava wasn't meant to see forwarded by mistake to the shop's account, a standard memo from Blake Ventures' legal affairs request to retrieve property acquisition files for Rivera Housing, dated back 15 years. Requested by Nathaniel Blake. Ava stared at the name. No subject line, no note, just action. Later that week, her mother called. "I saw him," Judith said. "He came to the community center." Ava's fingers tightened around the phone. Why he didn't give a speech, didn't ask for a plaque. He brought 3 boxes of documents, said they were the only paper copies left. Asked if we wanted them for the archive. Ava blinked. That's it. Not quite. He asked if he could set up a scholarship for kids who've been displaced under your father's name. Ava sat down slowly. And you said I don't need his redemption. But those kids might need the help. Silence passed between them. He didn't even say sorry. Judith added, not once. Ava exhaled. That actually sounds like him. She didn't cry. But later that night, she pulled the drawer open and found the letter she had left unfinished beside her father's photo. The envelope had yellowed at the edge. She unfolded it carefully, rereading every word with new eyes. She picked up a pen. At the bottom of the page, in a corner she hadn't filled before, she wrote, "If you truly want to live differently from your father, don't let me be the only one you prove that to." Then she folded the letter again, not to send it, not yet. At the bookstore, her steps were lighter, though no one would have called her joyful, just steadier, focused. She no longer checked the door when it opened, but when she reached the back room, there was a book waiting on the counter, a hardback copy of The Road to Character, worn at the edges, with a sticky note inside second copy I'm returning. First one was mine to keep, and she smiled, briefly. Then she tucked the note away, somewhere he wouldn't find it again, somewhere only she would know. The next day, the doorbell chimed again, and she didn't look up right away. The wind had shifted, not in the weather, but in the space between them. It was a Thursday morning. Rain had passed overnight, leaving the sidewalk slick and shining. Inside the bookstore, Ava sat cross-legged on the rug near the children's section, reading aloud from Charlotte's Web to a half-circle of wide-eyed kids. Her voice was even, steady, until her gaze flicked up and caught sight of him through the glass. Nathaniel stood outside, hands in his coat pockets, eyes not pleading, just present. She didn't pause, not even for a breath. But when the last child wandered off, book in hand and chocolate on their fingers, Ava rose. She didn't call for backup, didn't pretend to be busy. She walked straight out, as if she'd expected this. They stood in silence. The city hummed around them. A bus pulled up, hissed, then drove on. Nathaniel reached into his coat and pulled out a folder unlabeled, plain. He offered it. She didn't take it yet. It's done, he said. The real estate division, Division 3B, it's being dissolved. The board voted yesterday. I led it. Ava looked at him, not the folder. That was your father's division. He nodded. It was also the most profitable one last year. Still, she didn't take it. I won't pretend that fixes anything, he added. But it's no longer feeding off communities like yours, and it won't again. She finally took the folder, but didn't open it, just held it at her side. That's not the part I needed you to cut off, she said quietly. It's the part where it bled into people like me, into homes, into hope. Nathaniel's jaw clenched, just a flicker. I know. Ava looked away, toward the bookstore windows, where a child pressed a face to the glass and giggled at something unseen. She turned back. Her voice was calm, but not soft. I don't want your guilt, Nathaniel. I want the gap to stop growing. He didn't respond right away. When he did, it was just a nod, not defeated, just real. I'm not asking you to forget, he said. I won't. She replied. He waited for her to step back, to end it, to say this was enough. Instead, Ava tilted her head, almost smiling. but maybe I'm done pretending I don't remember you either." He looked at her, then really looked, and something small, but weighty, passed between them. Not forgiveness, but a thread, thin, human, unspoken. She stepped past him and toward the door, the folder still in hand. He didn't follow, just stood there, letting her walk ahead. And when she turned the knob, she glanced back just enough for him to know. The sun was sharp that morning in Copley Square, not warm, but precise. It cut through the glass facade of the Boston Public Library and landed on folding chairs lined up in quiet rows. There were no red carpets, no flashbulbs, no sponsors printed 10 feet wide behind podiums. Instead, there was a handwritten sign taped to the door, the True North Initiative, a gathering of the overlooked inside. Ava stood near the front of the hall, sleeves rolled past her elbows, pinning a name card to the chest of an older woman who insisted on bringing her own folding chair. Her name tag read, "Margaret, Nurse, 1984, refused payment," behind her. Nathaniel adjusted a mic on the wooden podium, but he wasn't the one who would use it. He'd made that choice deliberately. They hadn't rehearsed. No scripts, no speeches, only stories. Each seat would be filled by someone who had done something right and paid for it. The room was slow to fill at first, then it wasn't. Ava didn't wear a blazer. She didn't hide the callus on her thumb, the burn mark from a forgotten kettle. She looked like herself, like someone who hadn't forgotten what it felt like to be passed over. When the room stilled, she stepped up. No notes, no title behind her name. "My name is Ava. I run a bookstore in Roxbury." She began. "It's small, but that's where I learned the only people who read between the lines are the ones who've lived between them." There were nods in the crowd. Someone coughed. A phone vibrated, but no one left. "I was once turned down for something I loved, not because I couldn't do it, but because the numbers didn't work, because my name didn't sit right on paper." But that's not today's story. Her voice held steady. Today is about the woman who refused to sign a forged document and lost her pension, the kid who handed in a lost wallet and got suspended for being late, the man who fixed the community water line, unpaid because nobody else showed up. One by one, faces turned toward the stage, not just listening, belonging. I used to think justice meant being seen, but maybe it's not that. Maybe it's being remembered by the right people, even when the powerful ones forget. There was silence, but the kind that listens. Then a hand shot up near the back. A girl, maybe 10, walked shyly to the front. "Are you the one who returned that wallet in Roxbury last year?" she asked, holding something small and folded in her fist. Ava blinked, surprised, then smiled. "No," she said, crouching gently, but she didn't take anything, and someone gave her something more important back. The girl leaned in, whispered something into her ear, then slipped a bracelet plastic, purple, handmade, into Ava's palm. When Ava stood again, her eyes searched for Nathaniel. He was leaning against the side wall, arms crossed, unreadable to everyone else, but not to her. Their eyes met and held. She didn't call him up, didn't name him, but the thread between them held, like a seam restitched after a tear. In the applause that followed, Ava stepped back, not down, and Nathaniel. He didn't move, but she felt him there, still choosing to stay. The smell of hot glue and cinnamon filled the narrow aisles of willow and pine that afternoon. Outside, rain tapped lightly on the awning, but inside, the warmth was almost tangible, threaded through laughter, soft chatter, and the quiet focus of children folding colored paper into corner bookmarks. Ava moved between tables, sleeves rolled up, holding a pair of scissors in one hand and a cup of lukewarm tea in the other. She was helping Marcus, a third grader with a permanent cowlick and a shy streak, line up the edges of his cardboard creation when he suddenly tugged at her sweater. "Miss Ava," he whispered, leaning in, "is Mr. Nate your husband?" His question didn't land like a joke. It landed like truth, wrapped in innocence, a moment of hush, then giggles, even a chuckle from the corner where a mother pretended not to listen. Ava froze, then bent down to Marcus's level, brushing the hair from his forehead. She didn't answer, just gave him a half smile, soft and unsure, before gently patting his shoulder. She stood, straightened her back, and turned just in time to see Nathaniel at the doorway. He looked out of place only if someone still expected suits and boardrooms. Today, he wore a faded green t-shirt streaked with sawdust. The cuffs of his jeans bore paint stains blue, yellow, and a bit of white, likely from repairing the shelf in the reading nook last week. Their eyes met. Ava didn't speak at first. Then, with a tired kind of clarity, she said, "I thought I was teaching the kids how to quietly do the right thing, but I think they're the ones teaching me how not to hide when it matters." Nathaniel stepped closer, but not too close. There was still space between them, but it was no longer distance. The bell above the door jingled again. Ava's mother appeared, holding a small bakery box, the kind with twine looped around cardboard tabs. She looked around, spotted Nathaniel, and walked over without hesitation. She handed him the box. "Still warm," she said. "I added ginger this time." Nathaniel looked down at the box, then back up at her. "Thank you, ma'am." She paused, then, almost offhandedly, added, "You don't have to call me ma'am, just mom will do if you're going to keep showing up like this." No one said anything after that, not Ava, not Nathaniel. But something shifted quietly, completely. There was no announcement, no sudden change in music or air pressure, just the sense that the temporary had chosen to stay, and the permanent was no longer something to fear. Later, after the children had gone and the storefront was dark, Ava moved about the shop, placing chairs back, turning off lamps. Nathaniel waited near the front, arms crossed, watching her without saying a word. When she finished, she walked toward him, brushing a curl behind her ear. Nathaniel's voice was barely more than a breath. "If you hadn't returned that wallet, I might have never remembered I still had a heart." Ava didn't respond right away, but she didn't turn away either. And that silence between them wasn't the kind that pushed. It was the kind that waited. The grand ballroom of the Omni Parker house was dressed in deep navy drapes and soft amber lights, but it didn't feel warm, not to Nathaniel, not today. Rows of gray-haired men and women in tailored suits filled the front seats, murmuring over printouts, clutching shareholder reports with red-marked margins. Cameras lined the back. Whispers grew as Nathaniel walked in, not because he was late, but because Ava walked beside him. She wore no makeup, just a navy dress that grazed her knees, her curls tucked behind one ear. She wasn't here for show. She came because he'd asked her to see not what he had, but what he would give up. And now, it was all over the news. The headlines weren't subtle, from boardroom to bookstore, Blake legacy risked for romance. CEO dating below his class. Nathaniel sat through the first half of the meeting in silence. Reports, forecasts, numbers, until the voice of Martin Keating, chairman and an old friend of his father, broke through. "We've reviewed your recent reallocations to community grants," Martin said, tapping a glossy file. "They lack financial foresight." Murmurs of agreement followed. Martin's tone sharpened, "And your appearance in the press, walking beside someone not vetted, not part of our circle, calls your judgment into question." Nathaniel looked around the room. He knew these faces, knew the kind of questions they asked, and the kinds they never dared to. Then came the final push. Martin leaned forward. "So I'll ask you, Nathaniel, do you want to keep the company or keep her?" The air thickened. Ava's name wasn't mentioned, but she hung in the room like a quiet defiance. Nathaniel stood slowly, adjusting the mic, voice steady but stripped of charm. "I don't want to keep either if it means losing myself." Gasps. A few pens dropped. "I've spent most of my life trying to live up to someone else's legacy," he continued. "But I'm done trading respect for power, done measuring worth by last names and press releases." He pulled out a single envelope, placed it on the table. "I'm withdrawing my request to renew executive control. Effective immediately. I'll transition to a role where I can build, not just own." Martin stared at him like he didn't understand the language anymore. Nathaniel gave a slight nod, then stepped away from the podium, not waiting for applause. There was none. As he pushed through the crowd, reporters tried to stop him. Cameras flashed. Words flew like darts. Why now? Are you resigning because of her? Do you regret it? He said nothing. Outside, the cold Boston wind met him on the steps. His coat was still inside. He hadn't noticed. But then there she was. Ava, standing alone on the stone steps, her hands in her coat pockets. No cameras, no statement, just her. He paused. She didn't move. Then she stepped forward and reached out. Her fingers found his. No crowd, no speeches. But they held on like it was the one thing not up for negotiation. The Rivera Cultural Center had no red carpet, no valet. Its front steps were chipped, the windows slightly fogged from the early spring chill. But inside, warmth hummed like a slow, steady fire. Ava walked the narrow hallway, hands tucked behind her back, nodding at each photo frame, each story pinned carefully along the brick walls. There were no headlines, only memories, names, dates, scribbled notes on grocery receipts, faded Polaroids. A shelf displayed the worn leather wallet she once returned. No glass case, no label, just there. Next to it sat a copy of a community college transcript, circled in red by a guidance counselor who once said not worth the scholarship. Next to that, a small brass plaque from a bookstore that no longer existed, but lived again in every story written here. It had been exactly 1 year since she and Nathaniel stepped away from spotlights and boardrooms. They had never said the word retire. They just stopped asking permission to do what felt right. Now, True North wasn't a brand. It was a place, a rhythm, a room like this. Nathaniel stood by the east wall, sleeves rolled up, greeting guests with nods and easy smiles. No title on his name tag, just Nate. When a curious teacher asked, "So, who are you to this?" He smiled gently and answered, "Someone who got a second chance." Ava overheard it. And this time, it didn't make her stomach tighten. It made her still. She moved toward the children's area where a small crowd had gathered. In the center sat a little girl in braids, holding a folded piece of paper. She walked up to Ava, cheeks flushed, and handed her the drawing. It was a simple sketch, crayon colors soft and lopsided. A figure with curly hair standing beside a tall man holding a hammer under a crooked rooftop. "That's you," the girl said shyly. "And the man who fixed our roof. My mom said you didn't have to, but you did anyway." Ava crouched down. "That was a good roof," she said, "and a good day." Behind her. Nathaniel had stopped moving, his shoulders lowered. His face changed in that quiet, unmistakable way, like someone opening a box they'd kept closed too long. When the girl's mother mentioned how they got their housing back after the project restructuring, his eyes turned glassy. He turned away for a moment. She walked to him. He didn't wipe his face. She didn't need him to. Near the door, a reporter waited, notepad ready. She had introduced herself earlier, asked if she could write a feature, The Bookstore Girl and the Heir Who Left It All. Ava had smiled politely, said no. "This isn't a love story," she told her. "This is a story about trust, given back to those who never asked for it to be taken." The journalist paused, nodded. She wrote nothing more. Later, as the crowd thinned and evening drew its soft shadows, Ava sat on a bench near the back of the gallery, shoes off, ankles crossed. Nathaniel sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder. He leaned in, voice hushed. "I know you said no story," he said, "but if you let me, I'll tell mine." She didn't answer right away. Then she rested her head on his shoulder, and for the first time, he didn't feel like he owed the world a word. The air inside Willow and Pine smelled faintly of cinnamon and old paper. Outside, rain tapped a steady rhythm against the glass, soft as breath. The shelves were fuller now. Some books were new, most were not. But every spine had been touched by a hand that cared. Ava moved quietly between aisles, reshelving donated picture books. Her fingertips paused at a frayed spine, an old gardening guide from the 70s, cover sun-bleached and bent. She smiled. Someone had written in pencil on the first page, "Borrowed, not taken." She left it there, across the room. Nathaniel was setting 2 mugs on the reading table. He wore a soft navy sweater with the sleeves pushed up. Behind him, a group of kids, some still in their school uniforms, scattered on the rug, drawing bookmarks and giggling. One of them, a wiry boy named Isaiah, looked up and called, "Thanks, Mr. Nate." He grinned. "I only boiled the water." Ava looked up when she heard the bell above the door. A teenager stepped in, slightly damp, holding a small envelope. "This came for you," she said, pointing at Ava. "From the city council, I think." Ava nodded her thanks and opened it at the counter. Inside was a single page, a scanned design proposal for the new community wing of the library district. The final approval was stamped and signed. One detail stood out: a drawing of the front entrance, with hand-carved lettering above the door, "The Ava Morgan Room." She didn't cry. She just folded the paper neatly, slid it into the drawer, and continued shelving books. At dusk, she stepped outside to take in the autumn air. The drizzle had settled into a steady whisper. She almost didn't notice him at first, Nathaniel, standing just under the overhang, in the exact spot she once had the night their story quietly began. In his hand was a small box, no shine, no velvet, just a carved wooden ring, grain visible, shaped from the old support beam he had once helped repair when the roof above their heads had nearly collapsed. He didn't kneel. He didn't make a speech. He just looked at her and said, "I know I can't undo the things that broke you, and I'm not asking to be the answer to them. I'm just asking to stay." Her breath caught. She didn't speak. She stepped forward, wrapped her fingers around his. No cameras, no applause. Just 2 people choosing to stay in the quiet, in the rain, in the space they built, not by fixing everything, but by holding what mattered long enough for it to take root. Later that night, while closing up, Ava reached for a weathered copy of Baldwin's essays on the philosophy shelf. A folded page fell out, yellowed, almost brittle. Her name was written on it. It was a letter, from her father, typed on a typewriter, edges faded, dated the year he passed. To whom it may concern. It read, "My daughter, Ava Morgan, believes in returning what isn't hers. She believes in listening more than speaking. She believes people are better than their mistakes. The world may try to teach her otherwise. I hope she never learns that lesson." She stood in the silence for a long time. Then she placed the letter back in the book, closed it gently, and turned off the lights. The store was quiet, but something had stayed. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the scent of damp wood still lingered in the quiet corners of the bookstore. A bell above the door chimed softly. No one came in. Just the sound of time passing gently, like it finally had permission to rest. Sometimes, the things we build don't need applause. They just need to be real enough to hold us on days we doubt everything else. And maybe the truest kind of love isn't loud or flawless. Maybe it's the kind that knows where the cracks are and still chooses to stay anyway.